today I have a leader in media advertising and measurement. She is the co-founder and managing partner of Crowd Access, creating the first measurement standard for experiential marketing. Welcome, Alicia Richardson.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I mean, we met a few months ago. We know a lot of the same people, and you were informing me about measurement, and I figured I'd have to have you on because you're one of the first to actually try to measure this, which seems almost impossible to measure. But before we start, how did you get started?
Oh man. Great question. So I've been in advertising for the past 18 years, but I sort of stumbled into it. So I was knee deep in studying for LSATs, completely thinking that my trajectory would be becoming a lawyer. But at the time, there was a recession that was happening. I remember first year lawyers were being deferred, first year grads were being deferred. And I was just thinking to myself, I don't want to come out of school with the massive amount of debt and not have somewhere to land. And so I started working at this company called Undertone. I actually started in the finance department, and it was what's called a media network, one of the biggest ad networks in the industry at the time. And it was really amazing because it felt like we were in this bubble that wasn't affected by the recession. There was all of these dollars that were being pushed into advertising, and everybody, every brand sort of wanted to be across digital advertising. And so I moved into sales at the behest of the leadership of the company. And I was scared to death because I was like, this is not the trajectory of the path that I think I want to go on. What is sales? I thought sales was like a used car salesman when I had the visual.
Yeah.
And so I was like, this is not what I want to do. But then I slowly realized, to the credit of the leadership at the company, they allowed you to shadow different departments and understanding what did each department do, and getting to learn a little bit more about the ecosystem onto itself. So then I started to realize, oh, these brands actually have to spend money on advertising, and it's just a matter of where do you place them and which company do you work with. And so once I started realizing that it wasn't asking people to spend their own money, but it was asking folks to actually spend the money that the brands are giving to them to spend on behalf of advertising, it completely opened up a new window for me. So I spent about 8 years at Undertone, really cutting my teeth on all things about advertising. You know, there's so many different aspects of digital advertising. So to be able to learn that in depth was incredible for me. And also just thinking about how do agencies work, whether that's the holdco or the independent agencies, how do they represent the brands? You know, how does that whole intersystem interconnectivity work when it comes to advertising? And that was kind of what then led me to, so that was the open web. And I was like, okay, well, this is fantastic, but I wanted something new. So then I moved into another startup, which was called OpenSlate, and that was in the wall garden. So for anyone that doesn't know what a wall garden is, it's sort of, it's like YouTube or TikTok or Facebook Meta, where everything is insular and they kind of own everything from soup to nuts. The advertising infrastructure, but also the reporting. So everything is governed within that wall garden. And OpenSlate was an independent measurement company for YouTube that started when there were only 10,000 channels on the platform. So think about what YouTube is now. I started at OpenSlate, I think in maybe 2015, and they started measuring when it was 10,000 channels. By the time I left, it was over 4 million. It's probably skyrocketed even more than that now, right, to this day. So I saw the team build infrastructure and support and understanding what does good look like when it's not television. So you had all of these user-generated channels where, PewDiePie at the time was one of the biggest channels in terms of revenue that was being made and just overall viewership. And what they did was they created a scoring mechanism for all of the channels that sat within the platform. Because if I'm P&G and I'm coming into YouTube, I don't really understand what is a good channel that I should be placing my advertising on. It's all native to the channel in terms of the naming conventions. So the way that you sort of create infrastructure around that is leveling the playing field. And what they did was they gave every single channel a score so that we can then start to look at, okay, what bubbles to the top? What's sort of the top 10%, top 5% of YouTube where channels feel safe and it's suitable for that type of content? And they were eventually acquired by DoubleVerify, which was fantastic because you saw the work and all of what we put in really come to fruition, and people seeing the value of why you won't want, the wall gardens grading their own homework, right? You can't be a part of the person that is pushing the media and then also the one that's scoring it as well, right? There has to be some sort of independent layer that can verify that. And so seeing that was very, very exciting. And obviously, DoubleVerify has been a part of the industry for a long time when it comes to third-party verification with viewability and all of these different things that sit on open web. And then they were moving into the wall garden. So they acquired OpenSlate. I spent some time there before moving to Essence Ventures. So Essence Ventures was very exhilarating. I went to Essence right around the time that the pandemic was ending. And so it was if I could paint the picture of what the feeling was like, it was coming out of the George Floyd situation that had governed much of the pandemic and that sort of time period. And so I felt like, how can I pay things forward? I had spent 15 years already, or 12 plus years in corporate and working with all of these different brands, et cetera. And I wanted to figure out a way that I could give back with the knowledge that I had sourced in being a part of these different environments. And so when I heard that Essence, which has been around for 50 plus years, but what was really exciting is that it was restored back to Black ownership. So Essence had been under Time Inc. for some time, and the Dennis family then purchased it. And so it was really exciting to hear about the mission and the vision. What was also a huge part of my going there is the fact that it wasn't just Essence. They had acquired Beautycon, Refinery 29, Afropunk. So it was really an entire portfolio of companies that I would then be able to lead from a sales perspective, which was very, very exciting. And then after that is where the bright idea for Crowd Access, which is our independent measurement company, was sourced. And that really came from, for the first 2 years that we were at Essence, there was an explosion when it came to everyone wanting to be outside. Now, Mark, I don't know if it was just solely due to the pandemic and everybody was like, I got to get out of this house. I have to be outside. Maybe you can attest to perhaps your company feeling the effects of that around 2022, 23. But it was a really electric time for experiential, with a lot of brands doubling down on reaching these audiences. And so Essence was fantastic because it allowed us to bring value and really set the value, I think, for that audience, right? It had been undervalued for a very long time. And we did the due diligence on the asset on a whole, the portfolio, and saying, hey, here's the reach that this gets. Here's what the market value is more in line with. So once we right-sized that, it was exciting because we got a lot of multi-year partnership that hadn't existed before. And so the impetus for starting Crowd Access was a part of my time at Essence, where I recognized we were doing such a wonderful job in bringing in new partners, extending relationships with partners. But as the value of the opportunity went up, you had to find a different way of quantifying the output. You had to find a way to show, here's what the worth is, of what it is that you're spending on. Here's how we are able to measure that. And that friction, quite frankly, is what really allowed us to see that this isn't just an Essence problem. It's not just a refinery or an Afropunk or a Beautycon problem. It's an industry problem, because even when we sought after third-party companies to come in, we still weren't hitting the goals of expectations that clients had, given the investment that they were inputting into experiential.
Yeah, which is interesting. Like you, and I don't think people. There's always this confusion that events are you got party planners, then you got experiential. We come from an experiential world where it is tied to advertising. And there's this big shift now where, at one point it was an added value, basically when to essence or any, I came from the magazine world too. When I was on the ad side, which like you, I didn't sell. I didn't want to sell. I ultimately, you realize you're selling all the time.
Yeah.
And like you also said, it was a situation where they have the money. It's just where they're allocating it. So I worked at, two different magazines, and where do they put it? If I was in Condé Nast, they put in GQ, Condé Nast Traveler, Vogue, or Vogue was a given. But, if they didn't segment right and and then the events were really just an added value. And nobody, it wasn't measured. It was a way to drive the advertising. And now, and then as you can see, even in Essence, when it's sold to Out of Time Inc., I think now it's more of an event company than it's like
it's event led for
right,
sure.
Right.
Given the massive portfolio of events that they have under their umbrella, it's certainly I think it's an event first. They have the compounding effect of being a media company where they are a publisher and they also have social presence. So they're able to package it in a really unique way. But I think you're absolutely right, Mark. The absence of a referee in experiential, it's a structural feature of how the industry grew up, right? I think historically, to your point, live events were viewed as entertainment outlets, right? Where it's just like the applause was the measurement of success, right?
Or how many people were lined around the block, or how many people you had in through the door. But it's not that way anymore. I mean, now they're and even right now, I kind of feel it's going through another renaissance where, like, now with AI, people are like, well, events are real. Now there's everybody's trying to do one. The challenge that we have is like, budgets, and what do you want out of it? What does success look like to you? And that's the big question. And you'd be surprised how many people just don't know what they want out of their event.
Yeah, I have a lot that I can say on that one. I think to your point, the industry ballooned into this massive revenue driver. And on top of that, given the shift of attention and how, whether that's being led by Gen Z or just, the onset of AI, probably a blend of both, more and more people trust experiential, trust live opportunities that they can see, touch, and feel, because, it's the one thing that you can't prompt engineer. So I think that, to your point, and that has been structurally a part of the problem from an experiential perspective, where brands typically are the ones that usually, if you're planning a media campaign that's digital, you go in and you think about, okay, from a strategic perspective, here are the goals that I would like to meet. This is the reason for us having this campaign. And this is the ultimate output that we would like. Here are the results that would make this a successful campaign. I think the industry, and what a part of what we're trying to do at Crowd Access, is to make that connection that experiential marketing is too a part of a larger campaign, right? Where the central focus is likely the activation, but there's all these other tentacles to help to make it. Yeah, there's all these different things. So it's starting with, what is the goal, right? What is the effective goal that you would like to achieve here? And you have to hold everyone accountable for their part, because as, either an event owner or a measurement company or, an experiential activation company, you're being tasked with doing something that's in the best interest of the brand, but you have to first quantify what it is that they're looking for, right? Like, you can't very well verify or build or define something that hasn't been defined. Rather, you can't verify and measure something that hasn't been defined. And that definition has to come from the client for what they want.
Right. So absolutely. And it's a lot of smoke and mirrors out there too. People see things on TikTok and they're like, that was successful. Because we have clients coming to us the same way. Well, I want to do that. Like, does that work for you? So if you were going to, let's say you have a client, what is the first thing you ask them?
Yeah, so I should double tap into what Crowd Access does. So Crowd Access is the first independent measurement company for experiential marketing. So first and foremost, so that's table stakes as far as what we do. When a client comes to us, the first thing that we ask them is, what is it that you want to get out of this event? What is it that you want to get out of this campaign? Because again, the activation is sort of the central piece of it, but it's not the only part of an experiential campaign, right? So the first thing that we had to do when it came to experiential marketing is, it almost feels like the industry itself, not almost, I know this definitively, the industry has outgrown the language that it
Yes.
borrowed from digital, right? Well,
Yes.
first it had this implicit applause being like how you measure success.
Mhm.
And then it also borrowed some of the measurement metrics from digital to help to balance and understand, okay, now more money is coming into this. How do we actually measure it? And they use some of the metrics from digital, but experiential is its own beast. It's, $128 billion that's spent across the industry on a yearly basis. And so its definitions need to be native to that specific channel. And that's the first part of what we did when it comes to the sponsorship piece, which is putting together the framework of the way that you should look at experiential marketing and the things that come into that. And so we've been spending a lot of time evangelizing that, because the onus is on us as an independent measurement company to help to clarify all of these different definitions. You go to a trade show, there's a different language being used interchangeably that you think, hey, this means something different than what somebody expects. So you have to right size the language so that we're all starting from the same baseline, if you will, and then moving into how do we go about measurement now that we're on an even playing field.
So you're leading this chart.
I am.
So are there others that are trying to do what you do, or not talking about competitors or anything, but it's like it's a big ask to kind of change. It's like turning the Titanic here. I mean, it's like you said, we've been borrowing from so many different measurements. If it's like you say, digital or print advertising or there's so many things, and then experiential. In addition to that, you're talking about festivals. There's festivals, the conferences. It could be a concert. There's so many different things. Like, what would be a common? Is there any common metric that goes across all of them?
Yeah, so happy you asked. That was the perfect setup for what we have created at Crowd Access. So we have what's called an EPI, which is the Experiential Power Index, and that is the common language that we are evangelizing across the industry. So I want to back up a second just to first identify what I think are the three biggest challenges when it comes to experiential. The first is brands that are coming in typically only see about 15% of the picture, right? Where it's
Right.
you are rinsing and repeating a lot of the same type of activations or a lot of the same type of strategy because you have no idea of what's out
Hmm.
there, right? And you don't have time to evaluate because events move so quickly that you end up just defaulting to what you did for the past 5 years, et cetera. So the first thing is lack of visibility. The second thing is the fact that when the measurement that currently sits there, so there is some sort of understanding or attempt to understand what you've gotten. Typically, it comes from the event owners themselves, right? And again, I think that for any marketing channel, you need to have some independence to really understand what it is that you actually got back versus the promise that an event made to you, right? So an event says, here are the things that we will give to you. Every sponsorship is sold on a promise. That promise typically is around what we have evaluated as these 5 constants across every single event, right? What does every event typically have in order for it to achieve capital sponsorship? And so that definition of those 5 constants are then what the output should be measured upon, right? Because it's what you were sold the
Sure.
sponsorship
Like
on.
how many
So those
attendees
are
and yeah. Okay.
exactly. So
Basic.
those are the 5 pillars that we look at, right? So event reach, market value, historical performance, infrastructure, logistics. All of those things come with an implicit promise that the output should then tell you, did this event deliver on the promise of which I was sold, right? So that's sort of the baseline for the EPI. The last thing that it does is it provides a common language, right? There is no common language across a pop-up versus a trade show versus a B2B activation versus a festival versus a brand-owned activation. There's, so brands are not able to look at the data through with a through line, right? What is the needle that you're threading when you're evaluating the success of all of these different events? So lack of transparency, no common language, and then you're getting the results typically too late, right? Because even the event owners, when they do give you the result, they're coming 30 days after the event,
Now,
60 days.
and I'll be honest with you, sometimes they've been plunged a little.
From your lips to God's
I,
ears, right?
I word.
And so if that's the case, then it's those are three things where we understood implicitly how do we actually find a way to a achieve transparency across the industry, and then B, create that common language, and C, allow folks to have in real life measurement where you can actually triage in real time versus waiting for an autopsy report that shows up, 2 months later when you're on to, multiple different audiences. So the EPI experiential power index is an EPI score scored on a scale of 0 to 50. It's Crowd Access is really across two layers. So there's discovery and measurement. Discovery really helps with the piece of transparency, where every single event, and we have about 50,000 events that are in our platform today, they all have an EPI score.
Oh, they do?
Oh, yeah.
Even if they haven't, have they all agreed to be part of your platform? Or
no,
they can't. It's just, like, give me an example.
Great question. Sure. No, absolutely. I think it's a great question. We don't, so we have over 160 data sources that we pull in independently to score every single event that sits within the space. And that event is on, there's three sectors that we look at. There's B2B and B2C, and there's brand own. Okay. The discovery focuses on B2B and B2C events. Specifically for those events, there is a wealth of data that already sits in multiple different places where you can just ingest that data into one ecosystem, and then we apply our proprietary score in a uniformed way across every single event, right? So going back to what I just said about every event has a promise that a sponsorship is sold against, right? And so effectively, those 5 pillars that I talked about, event reach, market value, historical performance, infrastructure, and logistics, all of those are weighted into that EPI score out of 50. And so every single event gets a score against that based on those signals and input that we've pulled into our platform.
Okay. So these are amazing. I mean, can you give me an example? And you don't need to necessarily mention a client, or like if somebody comes to you, let's just, if you have a successful client you want to talk about, like, I don't want to say go through a whole case study, but give me an example of, like, let's say I'm P&G and they find you and they say, all right, I'm thinking about this event. Is that how it works? And they come to you and say, hey, I need your help to measure what I'm about to purchase, or how does it work?
Yeah, no, fantastic. So it works. Let's go with that analogy. That's a good one to start with. So typically brands are evaluating their strategy from an experiential perspective, usually months in advance, right? Before they get to the following year. So they'll reach out, whether through an RFP or just say, hey, I have something coming up and I'm thinking about evaluating these elements. Do you have any more that could possibly work for this type of campaign? So they can come into the platform. The platform is live and accessible. It's through subscription, where they come in, and it works just like a taxonomy. So you put in all of the filters of what you are looking for that event. What's the type of objectives? What's the type of audience that you're looking for? What's the event type in terms of activation? Is it a trade show? Is it B2B or B2C? So all of those filters are accessible to you where you input those. Once you input those, you get the feedback or the results based on those inputs. Once you get those results, there is a full profile for every single event that starts with the EPI score, and you can see the weights across those 5 pillars. And then you're able to look at a wealth of knowledge about that particular event, all sourced independently through the data partners that we work with, but in a uniformed way. So the profile is the same for everyone, and you can see and access all that you need to know about these different events. So typically where we see the sweet spot of high performance is anything over 30 or 35. Those are our prime and elite tiers where we know, okay, this event is typically performing well based on the outputs that we've seen, based on the results that we've seen, based on the expectation that brands have. Once a brand decides, okay, we want to execute this event, we want to execute at this event, they then pull us in from a measurement perspective where they're saying, here's the activation that we are building. We go and then measure that activation on ground at the event. We have in real life measurement. So the brands are seeing literally through our platform all of the friction points that are coming up at the event. So if it's, a 3-day event, day 2, they can see what happened on day 1, where if they are looking at their highest value audience and there's 3 different touch points within an event, and they're seeing that, this specific touch point doesn't necessarily work for them, then how do you pivot? How do you sort of readjust in real time to make sure that you're capturing that high value audience? So we're looking at all of these different inputs that can give them the tools that they need to adjust in real time, but also help them with the data right after the event to send to their CMO to give an early read of what's going on. So you're not waiting until 6 weeks later until you're on to the next event. There's at least some data that's coming in and being ingested that you can get that insight from. And just to double tap into that, as far as the measurement piece, once the baseline has been set for that event, that's the EPI score. What the measurement holds true is how did this brand perform against that baseline? So if I was sold, hey, this audience should, the audience expectation or the demo that we typically see are 25 to 34-year-olds. But then the brand shows up at the event and they see 45 to 55-year-olds, right? They'll engage, but is it what you sold, right?
It's not what you show. Exactly.
So, yeah.
So because this is fairly new for at least me, because, and I'm sure a lot of other people. So going back, I'm trying to put it in like real terms. So if somebody wanted to reach out to you, so like, let's say I'm P&G and I want to go to Coachella, right?
Yep.
So I go to your site and you have so through the subscription, I can look up Coachella, right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I hearing this right? And then you will give a list of things, and they can put it on their. They're already paying for the subscription, but they can then go through and then engage you. It's like, hey, we're thinking about Coachella, and then you would then come back to them and say, let's get your goals. But now that you've gone into the metrics, we can do a deep dive into that, and we will go to Coachella, and we will in real time follow to make sure there are no 50, 60-year-olds. Nothing against 50, 60-year-olds, but if that's not what it's no like the Gen Z influencer thing.
Almost accurate, almost a good read. No, you're about 75% there. So there's 2 layers. The first layer is what we call the discovery layer, which is really just about evaluation of the landscape, what is out there. Remember, I talked about there's only 15% of visibility for any brand marketer out there. And if they are thinking about where else can we activate, where else can we be, it takes a lot of time to actually go through that because there's no central place. Like you think about, think about what ComScore is to digital. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with digital, but if you are vetting a publisher in the open web, you can go to ComScore and figure out what are the details of that specific publisher that is specific to that site. What's the audience? What's the reach? What's the unique? Like all of those things you can get specifically from ComScore. So I think about the discovery piece a little bit like that, where it's really about understanding and vetting all of the pitches that come at you, right? So folks are inundated with pitches all the time where it's just like, come activate at this event, come do this, come do that. Yeah, everything is wonderful, but it's their pitch deck. It's what they are saying. And there is validation of what has historically performed, what brands have actually gotten out of those events, where you're not just going into it blindly or just using what an event owner is telling you as the basis of how you would actually activate at that event. So it helps to give some third-party verification on all of those events that exist so that you can get a true read on what's happening. And that's what the score helps to provide, that baseline before you even go into an activation. So it's not telling you, yes, absolutely activate at Coachella. It's really just giving you the baseline of what the expectation should be. So I'll give you a perfect example of that. Part of what we see today within the platform is social sentiment. So social sentiment is really huge when it comes to some of the equity that sits within brands. What we have found is that there are a lot of event owners that transact on equity, right? Where the big names in the world that have been around for a really long time. But does that mean that you still have the strength of when you started or when you really hit your stride? We're seeing some of those events tanking and then coming up again, or, just dying altogether. And so should you just rely on equity, or should you really look at, in real life in 2026, what is the valuation for this property and how much should I pay for it? How big should the check size be? So a lot of what helps us to evaluate that is not only just a look back or historical performance, but it's thinking about the temperature of what people are saying about that event. Will we go? Will we not? What makes sense for us in real time, and evaluating that to get an understanding of, well, the audience is abandoning ship. Do I still want to be here? This is not the right place. When all of this stuff, for example, was happening with Revolt and, Mr. Combe and all that stuff, it brought about this idea of like, do I want to show up here? Will the audience still support? That's just an example of something in real time that affects the overall value of a property, right? In the sense of, will the audience show up? That's a major pillar of what you buy into.
That makes sense. And then there's after the event too, which is, even the social, and are people still talking about it? I mean, we were actually doing a discussion about the things you can't touch and feel or can't necessarily measure. It's like, are they still talking about it after, or the event itself is just if it's a festival or something.
Conduit.
Right. It's right. So 3 days or the 2 days or the 1 day or the pop-up, whatever. It's all that stuff that happens before they talking about it and all the stuff after. Are they still talking about it in a good way or bad way?
Yeah.
It's no longer just that one event.
But let's be clear. So you're right. Right. And I think a huge part of what we've tried to assess, Mark, is when you pay for the sponsorship, a part of what you're paying for is the fact that the brand will do as much as they possibly can to promote their event, or the event owner will do as much as they possibly can to promote that event so that the groundswell that you as a brand coming in will get from the press, from the publication, from all the stuff that's happening at the event will help to bolster your presence as well, will help to amplify your brand. All of those things are a part of what you pay for in a sponsorship, right? Now, separately to that, you can have a campaign where we certainly encourage people for a window after the event. There are certain steps that you need to take to keep that audience engaged, to keep the people that you have seen as engaged with the brand, and make sure that you're doubling down on that. Those are different for B2C type events versus B2B in terms of the different types of audience that come in to those events. So we have benchmark data based on what best practices look like when it comes to how you engage an audience once the event has ended, for you to get the maximum amount of success out of that specific activation where it's like you're not waiting 2 months from now where they don't care about it to then double down. And so that is a separate sort of what you do afterwards and how you lean into that. But I think there's also accountability for what you've already paid for through the sponsorship lens that doesn't just fall on you as a brand.
Right. This is fascinating.
I've given you a lot to think about, and we're just
blow my mind. And I'm in it. And I don't think enough people measure. I mean, I'm sure the big companies measure, but most of the people just they just wing it, I think, sometimes. So I think, I think it's important to, like I said, we just execute as requested on our side. And, even the brands, I don't think they always understand why they're doing it. And I have enough clients and we're talking big companies, they're not doing the homework.
Oh, 1,000%. I mean, ultimately, I think a lot of it, it's because of a lack of education, which is why we're starting there. First,
Right.
you have to bring clarity and let
Right.
people understand exactly how all of these things work, what the expectation is, what is suitable, what is the benchmark against your category. All of those things have to be the education is lacking
Yeah.
for audiences that just don't know about experiential and haven't spent the time there, which is why they rely heavily on event owners or, in your case, even activation agencies. I can't tell you how many activation agencies have come back and said, I'm being tasked with having to prove ROI.
Sure.
I just built out the activation. Like, why is this
Right.
something really?
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely. They do come to us and they're like, and I actually, the first question, what does success look like? Because I need to know. And you'd be surprised how many of these large companies just can't answer that question.
No, and I'm not surprised. I'm actually so I am so yeah, it's most of them, right? It's
Right.
most of them because it's very nuanced. It's also you tell me, like a lot of it is, can you tell me what I should be expecting? Can you give me the insight into that? Because they hand the keys over to you as sort of the experts. The problem with that is then you have this discrepancy at the end of a campaign where they feel like they did not actually get maybe the results that they were hoping for, but then do you understand you didn't share that upfront on the upfront, and here we are sort of having to find a balance at the end of it. So you're right, the success metrics at the beginning is hugely important. One of the ways that we actually help activation agencies within the space, for example, is oftentimes what happens is you'll come into an event, Mark, your company will build out a wonderful activation and the results will show that in our measurement tool where we're able to see, okay, well, here are all these things that are happening. And, people really seem to like this activation, but how did it move the bottom line, which is a part of what we connect the tissue to as well. That doesn't just sit within the footprint, but the way that we help creative agencies is that once a brand starts to measure using the same language, what happens is a compounding effect of every single activation that they have now gets scored in the same way and now gets measured actively in the same way. So they can go back and they could say, oh, when Mark's company did this particular activation for us, here's the output that we got. Here's the score that we were able to get from that event. How much of that was based upon the build itself and how the audience sort of traversed or reacted to that build versus just, so it gives you real transparency into understanding who gets credit for what and how many of these tie back to this one activation agency versus another versus another. When you have that compounded effect where you can really extrapolate the data in a concise way and understand the mechanisms that are pushing your success forward, it becomes better for all parties involved.
No, I love that. We're gonna have to talk more about that later. I said, like, you're right. We get taxed with it, and I don't, it's tough, and things always move so fast that before you know it, we start going in a different direction, and everything looks great, and then after the fact, was it successful? And still, they can't answer.
Yeah.
or there's different people within the organization who have different ideas. That's the other thing I do.
Of what success is, for
Yeah.
sure.
Or even before or after, and it's like y'all need to come to. You're right. They need to be on the same metric to understand
Correct.
what they're asking for. So
Well, then it helps you. Yeah, it helps everyone. Specifically, there's no scapegoat. That's the beautiful thing. The accountability, it just brings accountability to the fro, right? And it helps people understand, well, here are the metrics that were assigned. Here's how we performed against it. And so you really get to analyze, what could I be doing differently? Sometimes what the way that I like to look at this is that it's not really it's not a blame game necessarily, or who's at fault for this or who doesn't know this. I think it becomes a discovery piece of, oh, we could be doing this better here, or maybe we should pivot this. There's a lot of ways that you could splice the data, and our AI technology helps us to do that too. So in our platform, once that input is ingested, we use AI to help us understand the data more effectively, right? To then say, how is this compounding effect working? So if we're looking across, the same types of activations, for example, the output might suggest, hey, here's what people at festivals react to best. Like, these are the types of activations that we're seeing perform really well. Or, this activation agency, whatever it is that they're doing or the way that they set this up seems to be coming to the fro at all times. How do we keep that going? How do we use that nugget to help things be better?
All right. So it looks like you can help us too. All right. Well,
Lucas.
keep me out of trouble. Right. So this has all been amazing. So how does somebody reach out to you guys? Give us the website, social media, so that they can actually, learn more about you guys.
Yeah, so we're crowdaccess.co, and I spend an inordinate amount of time on LinkedIn evangelizing a lot of this information. So if you go to crowdaccess.co, or I'm Alicia Richardson, I'm always talking about experiential and, a lot of wonderful things that are happening within the space, because there are a lot of really great things, even though we talk about, some of the challenges, there's just still a lot of really amazing activations and fun things that are happening to date. But yeah, those are the main ways. And then we're also on Instagram, so you can reach us there at Crowd Access.
All right. And what are you working on next?
Yeah, so we will be at NASCAR. That's coming up. I think we're really excited about that activation. A huge part of what we're doing, though, so we're doing measurement there, but a huge part of what we are focusing on is really the evangelizing of what crowd access is, what the EPI is, and publishing and the methodology overview so that it's auditable for folks to see. There's no hidden rooms. We are very transparent about what the weighting is, the study confidence, so folks can actually see how the measurement works. And those we will be putting out pretty soon. So that's what I'm excited about, so that people can actually see a little bit more in depthly what we're talking about, and also look at the study design as well.
Just let me understand the NASCAR part. Are you doing it for your company for NASCAR? Are you exploring NASCAR and then putting that out potential sponsor? Like, who's the ultimate client on that one?
Yeah, great question. So the client that we're actually working with at NASCAR is Anduril. Not NASCAR as in the event owners. We're working with Anduril. That's the name of the client.
Interesting. All right. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Like I said, there's so much, and we're going to have a follow-up conversation now that I know you can help me. But it definitely you can help other people, because I'm going to tell you, it's a very fractured industry that needs to be put in check a little better. And I think it would definitely help everybody.
Yeah. Look, I think our major goal, we felt the pain of clients walking away and the friction in not delivering what they thought the expectation is, realizing that the fault is not necessarily on you as even an event owner. It's really just the infrastructure that was built into the channel. So how do we make all tides rise, like all boats rise to the top, right? I think a lot of it is, if you can truly get the credit for the success that you're bringing to something, then the only way that works is through clarity and through the understanding of what is the right way to measure that feels balanced for
Yeah.
all parties involved.
Right. No, definitely. It's I can't tell you how many times we've done projects or we watch projects happen and everybody thinks it went really, really well.
Yeah.
And then
You get ghosted, right? It's just like,
exactly, or the person gets fired, your client gets fired. I'm like, because somebody else had a different idea. It's happens more often than not, or the other way around. It's like, oh, it wasn't so great. All of a sudden, like, hey guys, look at all these things that happened.
yeah.
But they're always looking at the guy next to them. It's like, well, they had longer lines and their activation was big. It's all, it's feelings, it's people's egos, and it all has to be put aside for a bit. And you have to lean into this a little more.
So one last thing that I'll double tap into there, I talk about sort of the EPI as the leading metric, if you will, for crowd access, but there's still the sub metrics that everybody is familiar with that gets, they don't get thrown out just because we sort of have the EPI as the lead. But there's all of these additional sub metrics that we include. The one thing that I will say is what happens oftentimes with brands is that they know experiential works, but they need to be able to prove that to their CMO and
Yes.
their CFO. And crowd access really gives the handshake the same credibility as the click.
Right.
What I mean by that is when you look at digital, there are all of these metrics with the click that tells you who paid for what, how did people buy afterwards, how do you actually track the revenue that's associated with that, which is a huge part of what we do for the offline metrics and tying that to the online. The moment that you have transparency within that connectivity of how you're moving the needle, you ultimately provide your contact, whether that's a CMO or a senior director, with the boardroom language that the CFO needs to give you that yes, to increase the budget for the next year. But if you don't give them language that they are familiar with, and someone from a finance and accounting background, all too familiar with what they're looking for, then they can't justify it. And what has been put out are really these big glossy reports, beautiful photos. So many people showed up. Oh my God, it's just wonderful.
Absolutely.
That does not translate to a CFO, and you're not going to be able to continue to get budget and to continue to have success with that because you're not speaking their language.
Wow. So true. All right. So I have so many questions. I want to pick this up more else. Thank you again for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Of course. This is fun. No,
right.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited about your podcast. I look at some of your other interviews, which is really nice because it gives insight into what's happening in the world of experiential. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank
which is
you. Thank
awesome.
you for the encouragement. I'll see you later.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, Mark. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to sign up for our email newsletter at markstevenagency.com and subscribe and comment on your favorite podcast app. This is creating the perfect experience where passion meets inspiration.